until that 10th time where I'm like, wow, this is a wall.
He does not have the best study habits. 8th grade is high school at his school. It's not really high school until 9th grade, and he
something. But I mean, in a lot of our K through 12 classrooms, like I know I was discouraged.
Welcome to our third episode of our podcast, Learning Out Loud. I'm Dr. Brandi Robinson, the founder and owner of Learner Journey Labs.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I have a real title, but basically it boils down to being the Brandi Whisperer and Chaos Coordinator here at Learner Journey Labs.
And today we're going to be talking about psychological safety and learning, which is kind of a big word that really just talks about allowing a space for students to fail and feel safe in that failure, because a lot of times we learn more from our mistakes than from what we do correctly.
So on the last episode, we talked a lot about failing safely and allowing the learner to fail safely. What do we mean by that? Like, if you had to sum it up in like 2 minutes or less.
I think when we talk about a learner failing safely, it's allowing a space for a learner to get a low grade distribution. So either it's not worth any points or it's worth a very small amount of the points in the course, but they get quality feedback on that item so that they might have failed and made a mistake, but now they can fix it before they get to the high stakes portion of the course on how we're assessing them. So I would say that's kind of my 2-minute version of that.
All right, and you said they're low point value, but it's not busy work, correct? Like,
yeah, definitely to make that distinction. It's not busy work, y'all. It's more of, before I'm going to assess your thinking, like we talked about previously, I'm going to find a way to assess your thinking so that you can understand independently where you are in the journey for mastering that skill, as opposed to I take my exam and there's maybe, say, nothing before the exam that really helps you identify if you're correctly thinking, and then you fail the exam and that's not safe. That is, now my grade is wrecked,
right,
and there's
stakes.
nothing I can do. Yeah,
that's more of high stakes. So it's kind of like a study guide to a degree, would you say?
I would say it's like a study guide, but you're getting, like, someone's coming behind you to check it. So either this is something like an interactive in the class setting. So at Learner Journey Labs, we build a lot of interactive H5Ps that are just quick checkpoints, drag and drop, multiple choice, select all that apply, and really, as the student is going through the content, they're able to check their learning. So I think it's kind of like a study guide, but in that sense, like, an external force is looking at it and saying, like, yes, you got this right. No, you didn't get this right.
Makes sense. And I know in our nursing courses, we do this with what we call the NCLEX practice, where we have them do 2 questions per objective. And then we have the walk with me, which walks them through, which we also talked about last week, where it walks them through the process. What would that look like in, say, a math course, like your specialty?
Gotcha. Yeah, so in a math course, math courses are always challenging for this reason, because
right.
It's really hard to give feedback on a math problem or to auto-grade it in a math problem without having risk for external things. But one of the things I do in one of my undergrad math courses is I actually give them a solution manual the week after. So they go through and they take these little checkpoint quizzes that are worth 5 points. So they're not worth a ton of points, but it is enough that it's worth them doing it. And then in that following week, I'll actually give them a solution that's kind of like the walk with me. Like, it really breaks it down step by step so they can kind of see, like, yes, I got that wrong. Now we've rolled to a new week, but let me find the mistake before I get to the test. So it kind of functions similarly. Another thing that I've done in my math classes actually is utilizing articulate storyline in math. And in the articulate storylines, we've been able to be more dynamic about how we're grading. So in a native learning management system, or even like in a K-12 classroom, a lot of times we just grade the final answer.
Right.
And math is really difficult because the final answer doesn't really matter in the big picture for me. Like, it's more about, can you think your way through something, and are you using the right thought connections to get to the right answer? And so in Storyline, we've designed several different interactive opportunities for students that are checking the thinking along the way. So we might present a problem, but then as you're working it out, you might be answering different questions on the way to the final answer. And then the final answer is also being assessed. But those storylines are not heavy portions of the grade. They're really meant to be a guided practice type scenario where you might bomb it, but you could either take it multiple times or you could go back and take it again before the exam because it wasn't worth a huge portion of your grade. So students that are highly motivated to improve will take it a bunch of times, actually, which is fascinating because students in undergrad don't love doing a lot of work. But because they find value in it, they'll repeat it. And then when they see that it pays off on the exam, I see a huge spike like after that first exam where they're like, oh, this is why I'm supposed to be doing this because I can actually understand where I'm going wrong in that process.
Okay, so we've talked how we provide the opportunities to fail safely. Why do you think it's important? Why have we made this such a big part?
So a lot of things go back to my kids and observing things with my kids, as well as the K-12 classroom knowledge that I had in the classroom. And really kind of, we do learning so well in the younger years. Like there's such, like kids are excited. They want to learn. They want to explore. They want to do. And then it's like something happens in those upper years where it's like we lose all of that fun. And so a lot of these types of ideas have come from reflecting back on that. And so kind of the analogy I like to use a lot for like why we do this is my kids are all incredibly stubborn, all three of them in very different ways. And you could tell them until the cows come home that the pot is hot if it's on the stove.
Right.
And inevitably, one of them would have to touch it. So there was like a controlled, like me always hovering when it was on super hot, but they were always like trying to kind of get close to it. And once they kind of realized, oh, the stove is actually hot, but not in a way that burned their hand and had to go to the ER.
Right.
They were like, oh, lesson learned. It was actually hot. That was actually really valid what mom was saying. And so when we translate that into the classroom, in the classroom, they need to understand like, wow, you did that wrong. We're not going to do it wrong 30 more times so that now you have a habit 30 more times that you've done it wrongly. Instead, do it wrong, hit the wall, fail safely, and then you adjust and you're able to get the correct habit in place. But a lot of it is really coming back from that experience of like watching really stubborn people, including myself, have to actually make the mistake to be like, oh, that's why the teacher said to use substitution here and not to use elimination, to take it back to like a math example.
Right. And I think also with my own child, he needs to study for exams, and we just went through exams. And he does not have the best study habits, but I also don't think the school, I think, is assuming that the boys are going home and studying and have the study habits at times, or the teachers, and he doesn't all the time. And so sometimes he thinks that staring at a piece of paper for 5 minutes is studying. And I've learned in watching him and with my education background, he is very much an auditory learner. So he needs to, you can give him a study guide, but if he doesn't read the question and the answer, he doesn't do well. But, or if I could do flashcards with him and, again, me ask the question, him and saying the answer, or me giving the answer and him kind of coming up with the question, that works. But, now he'll be 14 in a couple weeks and he doesn't want to do flashcards and he just wants to stare at the paper. And I'm like, so I'm trying to transition. He does a lot on quizzes and Quizlet. They do a lot of Kahoots. And I'm like, you need to read it out loud. You need to say it out loud because that's where it is. So I think providing these opportunities to fail safely are important because they can realize the importance of maybe needing to study in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's really good. We actually did a YouTube short the other day where we were talking about why studying is not always productive for people. And that was kind of one of the feedback points was like staring at a paper doesn't work for everybody. Sometimes it's like visuals. Like me, I'm very visual. So if there's like an icon or a flow chart or something like that, I connect to that. but I can't just like, my middle daughter just writes everything. And if she writes it, she remembers it.
Right.
For me, I could just be writing all day long and I have no idea what I actually wrote. But I think you had an important element that you kind of touched on there, and that was like independence.
Right.
And I think that as we look to, again, we're not aiming for today when we teach learners. We're aiming for where they need to be in their workplace and in their careers and as productive adults. And I think that some of that psychological safety is really allowing them to experiment with the studying. Because if I'm in like my history class versus my math class versus even like the first time you get to like, let's say an undergrad, you hit those junior level courses and they're a whole different level of thinking.
Right.
Failing safely also allows them some independence to explore like what's working for me, what's not working for me, and what worked for me in English may not work for me in math.
Right.
And so I think there's kind of a cool element that you're bringing up too, that it's like some of that creating a safe space to fail can also help people better understand how to do it the next time.
Right. I think too, in the K-12 setting, like what you said, independence, it's providing that independence with him. I know I've stepped back in the last like year or two, and I don't even think I checked any homework this last year. And, you know, we reminded him to study, and even though high school, 8th grade is high school at his school, it's not really high school until 9th grade, and I think he took one high school class, maybe two. I took a step back and let him realize what he's going to need to do in high school. And at the end, and his grades weren't the grades that they were when I stayed on top of him and helped him a whole lot more. I did offer the help, and he chose not to. And so at the end of the year, he was kind of disappointed with his GPA. I mean, it's a 3.7, so it's not like bad by any means, but he would like it to be higher. So I was like, what did you realize? And he said, I need to study more and I need to learn how to study and I need to learn how to take a test.
I think there's also an element of society, and I talk to my doctoral students about this all the time, is my doctoral students hate losing any points. And they're all educators, which is a whole other like ball of wax, because there is something about teaching education students or teaching educators where we want to be perfect.
Right.
But I think like holistically, when I look at the landscape of K-12 and higher ed right now, there is so much anxiety around grades that it is really to the detriment of so many people, because that anxiety blocks the exploration. It blocks the love of learning. And I think that psychological safety, it kind of undoes some of that anxiety, I feel like. You know, like if I don't know how I'm doing until I take the test and I fail the test, then that's a big deal. But if I know along the way that like, oh, I made this mistake and I can correct it now before the test, I think that it doesn't put as much pressure on you as an individual to feel like you have to be perfect on every single little thing, because you've had like some mountains and some valleys before you got to the test.
Right.
And I just see this thread of anxiety, because it's like, if I make any mistakes, that's a bad thing. And I think part of that is just we haven't created a space to say like, hey, make the mistake here.
Right.
You know, and learn from it and grow from it.
Well, and I think, again, since my background is more elementary, K-12, I think we put such a huge emphasis on grades and having to be perfect and needing all of the points. And it stresses kids out. And a lot of times they're not failing safely. You know, they get the study guide, they do it. Sometimes the teacher goes over it. Sometimes the teacher doesn't go over it. They take the test and then they'll have no idea how they did or how they're going to do. Or again, you know, there's sometimes this year where my son's taken a test and not done well. And he's like, I felt like I knew it. I don't know what happened. And I think if there was more failing safe and we instituted it in lower grades, then people wouldn't be as stressed or anxious, and grades might not be the end all be all that people make them out to be.
Yeah, and I think we do a really good job of raising small humans, to steal your terminology. because Jacob is 21 right now. So I have a 21-year-old who's a pre-med student. And the hardest thing about being a mom to like an adult now is knowing I'm watching him make mistakes. And at the same time, it's like you've got like the devil on your shoulders. And like one of them is like, you could just fix this. And then the other one is like, but if you fix this, he's not going to know how to survive his adult years.
Right.
And so literally it's like when you watch like the train wreck happening, it's like, I know it's going to happen and I just have to be here, but I have to keep my mouth shut, which is really hard for me to do in the first place.
Hard for you.
It's so hard for me. Not even just anything. It's really hard to keep my mouth shut. But like we've recognized that like as we watch people grow as humans, like just in our natural growth and our maturity patterns, that it's necessary like as parents that we have to just let this happen. And if I don't just let this happen, then the next time he's faced with adversity, he's never going to know how to get over it. But for some reason, that's like living in a separate compartment from actual learning when they are the same thing.
I've seen you go through it with Jacob as an adult now. And so I've kind of taken a page and I'm like, what if I let him do this in 7th and 8th grade when there's still some stakes, but it's not high stakes like college.
Yeah.
And in hopes that like when he does get there, he can be successful and we can realize some of the hurdles now versus later.
Yeah. And I think like this is stuff like our parents did with us too. Because like if I think about like when I was a kid, right? So we'd ride our bikes around the neighborhood and we would like stop at the neighbor's house to use the phone to like call mom and dad and be like, we're still alive. It's been 3 hours. Just checking every 3 hours.
Right.
But I think some of how society has grown and evolved has taken all of that out. So the little things like I used to call and make my own doctor's appointments like as a teenager. And I didn't do that with my own kid because we had a portal. And I was like, it's like snapping fingers to make his doctor appointment or, you know, so there have just been a lot of things that I think or with technology too, that has just kind of transitioned a lot of the little scaffolded moments of independence like we had as kids. Like, I mean, you can't let your kid run around the neighborhood anymore necessarily, at least not in the city of New Orleans or even in Metairie. Like, you can't just let your kid ride the bike. So there's also been some interesting developmental milestones that have come out because they're no longer safe.
Right.
And so I think that that's also, you know, if we look at that in parallel with education, we're doing the same thing in the educational space. We're taking away those opportunities for them to fail because we're getting stricter and stricter and stricter as we like go down the line. Like my kindergartner now needs to start kindergarten knowing how to read and tying their shoes.
Right.
But I really just need them to be a human and know how to talk to other kids and make friends.
Right. I think we expect kids to grow up so fast these days. And, you know, like the developmental steps aren't there. Like I don't have to have Brandon call me every 3 hours because I can check on Find My and see where he is. We haven't signed up for Life 360 yet. We'll get there eventually. But, you know, and he doesn't have to have that responsibility of, checking in. I need to call mom then. I need to call dad because he knows that we can check his location.
Yeah.
And I think too, and I know one of his friends or classmates told him that he should be in more honors classes and he should have taken more high school classes in 8th grade so he could reach these bigger and better milestones. And I was like, but Brandon, maybe that's not your journey. Just because it's his journey, it doesn't mean that it's yours.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that he's going to be automatically more successful than you. You know, my husband, James, he struggled in school, in elementary school, and he did well in high school. And then in college, he was a college athlete and balancing, you know, golf, which gave him the scholarship, so he didn't incur student loans, and school. And sometimes he and his friends would joke that they were on the C's and D's for degrees plan. Whereas I was, like you were talking about your doctoral students, I don't like missing a point. I strive for perfection. And I've told Brandon multiple times, I'm like, you know, one of your parents is on the C's and D's for degrees plan, and one was in honors starting in 4th grade. Who makes more?
Yeah.
It doesn't always mean that you're successful based on if you took Algebra 1 in 8th grade or whether you take it in 9th grade. But I think there's so much pressure to be perfect and grow up. And all of these things that really aren't going to mean anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like we've just, as a society, and I look at education and I look at the patterns in it, right? So like a lot of times I want to understand like what are the external factors that might have caused a shift. And I do think a lot of what we're talking about has been influential in that shift, because as we're giving our kids less independence because of technology, we're also doing it not just in the home, but in the schools as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's like, okay, well, now you've got an iPad. So now you can do your spelling on your iPad, or you can do this on your iPad, or like, I mean, good Lord, Jacob in his pre-med program has all of these like books with like tons and tons of practice stuff in the book that he can do on his iPad. But none of that really lets him fail safely, because it's not an actual assessment. Right. It's not an actual, like when he's in the practice mode of everything, it's just going to tell you like, this is the right answer.
Right.
So like there has to be some type of stake, I feel like, for psychological safety. Otherwise, it's the same thing as practice.
Right.
And practice, even when you're getting things wrong, doesn't feel like, oh, I should probably fix this.
Right.
Whereas like, oh, I took a pop quiz and like I failed the pop quiz, now I have to do something. But I mean, in a lot of our K through 12 classrooms, like I know I was discouraged, 15 years ago, to give any type of pop quiz. It was like, no, you've got to post it on, Edline 3 days in advance to give a quiz. And you have to like also do this, and it has to be on your board, like on your whiteboard, so the students would know it coming. And I was just like, how many different ways do I have to say there's a quiz, y'all? Like it has to be in the parent portal, on my whiteboard, in the calendar. I have to say it at the end of class. I have to say it at the start of class with my objectives. So we've just gotten so far away from any kind of like low stakes, let's just try it out. Now I feel like the pressure is almost coming from these design changes in how we treat these assessments.
Right. When I feel like everybody wants to hold everybody's hand and make sure they're all successful and all of these things. And then you get to the exam and they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Or, you might have given it on the study guide, but you're asking it in a completely different way, whereas they've only thought about it this way. And I really liked at parent-teacher conferences the second semester, I went to see Brandon's English teacher, and Brandon didn't do well on the first test. And he said, what they don't realize is anything that we talk about in class, anything that we assign in reading, anything that's on the board, all of those I could test on, not just the study guide.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went home and had a big conversation with Brandon about that. And he had a test a couple weeks later. And so on the way to school, I was like, okay, well, tell me what you've been talking about with the Odyssey. I think that's what they were reading at the time. And he went into it a lot more, and what some analogies and things that they had been discussing. And he ended up getting an A on that test because the teacher had broken it down, and he said, the kids don't believe me when I say, or they don't listen always. They think if it's on the study guide, that's going to be it.
Yeah.
And I think we hold hands so much until it's, ACT time, and then nobody can hold your hand.
Yeah. And I think you pointed out a good thing there when you were talking about the study guide. The psychological safety has to align with how you're going to be tested in that high stakes test. And so sometimes a study guide might just be recall. Like
right.
You might just be, and I find a lot of times study guides are recall based. But then when we get to the test, it's like, now I want you to apply it. Now I want you to analyze it. Now I want you to justify it. And so using like the example you were talking about the Odyssey, Brandon is in the car and he's explaining it. He's giving you analogies. That's showing he's analyzing it. Like that's very clear analysis. Potentially even some justification if he's giving you an analogy and explaining it. So I think another element of psychological safety is that there has to be an alignment between whatever is acting as the psychologically safe assessment and what that end goal is for how students demonstrate their thinking or that skill in the class. And I've seen really, really bad classes that have so much interactive practice in them that you're like, oh, that feels psychologically safe. There's like a little quiz at the end of every module. And so that's your chance to like know. But then when I look at the quiz, when I'm doing like the curriculum mapping for an institution, I look at that quiz and I'm like, that's literally just recalling facts. And then I look at your exam, and your exam is actually analysis of case studies. And I'm like, okay, that's not psychologically safe. Like, you're not giving the learner the opportunity to realize that they have a fallacy in their thought process, or to realize that I don't actually get it. Because when you're in a classroom with your teacher, and I hear students say this to me all the time, when I'm in a classroom with my teacher, I know it.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I go home, it's like it leaves my head. And I'm like, that's not probably true. What's happening is, in the classroom, you might be relying on all of that thought filler from the teacher, where she's kind of hand-holding and walking you through it, but actually you can't independently do it.
Right.
So that's where that psychological safety, it needs to be independent. It needs to be aligned and also independent of any hand-holding. Because, like my mom loves to say about me and my son and both my daughters, is that we don't learn until we run into the wall 10 times. Right. And something happens on that 10th time where I'm like, wow, this is a wall. And I can keep hitting it or I can change it, but it's one of the two. It's there. So I think that maybe another element of that psychological safety is allowing the learner to be alone and to be forced to independently do it. Not in a classroom with the teacher, not open book, not like Jacob's little practice things. He can click a button and go to the textbook page that gives him the answer. And I'm like, I get why they're doing that.
And it's good in theory.
Right.
But how's that going to help him when he takes the MCAT or whatever?
Yeah, because we're talking about organic chemistry here, guys. So like, he's doing this practice thinking he's learning, and he's like understanding everything. And I'm like watching him, and I'm like, what did you just click? And it's like, you just went to the exact page with it. Like, no. Like, if you got it to a test today, you would have failed that question.
Right.
But because before he even inputs his answer, he can like take that hint. Then I'm like, well, like, that's not the thinking you're going to have on the assessment. You're going to be in a room with like 200 other orgo students taking a test. And like, for him, I mean, my kids are very, very ADD.
Very.
So for him, I'm like, I almost feel like you need to have like someone banging cymbals in the background while you're like doing your practice assessment at home, and like the dog's barking, because he'll even say, like, when I'm in a hall, like every time someone turns a page, I stop and I like look. Yeah. So, it's like, okay, you're sitting here and you're clicking the hint, you're getting the hint before you even do the question. You're doing it in complete silence and isolation, which isn't how it actually is happening in your brain, the way your brain is wired. So there's just so many elements of this psychological safety that I think people just oversimplify it when they are aware of such a thing. And, it's like, okay, well, we're going to do this in class, and I'm going to kind of do it like an exit ticket, where I kind of ask a question and I mentally like count who got it and who didn't. Or I'm just going to add a checkpoint to the end of my module, but those questions don't really align to the level of questions. Or I'm going to give a study guide. I had a doctoral student be like, where's my study guide? And I was like, that's hilarious. What do you mean study guide? Study guide. No one's giving you a study guide in your defense. Like, so, I think there's all these elements to it that we don't really fully explore. It's like we latch onto one element of it and we're like, we did it. Students are good to go now.
I despise as exit tickets. I never used them in my classroom, and I don't see the point, because it would be better, because in that moment you're assessing what you just went over and what they said, and they can still remember. It would be better as something the next morning.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Or the next day. Because if we go over fractions and then I have you add 3 fractions as an exit ticket, you're going to be able to do it right then and there. But you might not be able to remember it the next day. Mm-hmm. So that's my hot take on exit tickets.
I also think that exit tickets, like, to just take I'm just going to take the diversion with you a little bit there. I also think that exit tickets are inherently recall.
Right.
And so that doesn't really tell me anything, because also there might be a parent that'll be studying that recall base with their kid later, and that's good. And also, I would have just looked at the person next to me and found their answer if I didn't know it.
Right.
Like all these cutesy strategies of like give your kid the whiteboard and like have them hold. I have just copied what somebody else said if I didn't know. Because who wants to admit they don't know the answer to the exit ticket? Like,
right. And I don't know, they don't make sense to me, but if you love them and you like them, more power to you. It just seems like recall.
Well, and I think it's another way of putting pressure on people, right? Because like an exit ticket is in front of the whole class too.
Yeah.
So it's like everyone's here, everyone can see what everyone's doing. Now we have an exit ticket, which is just further feeding that anxiety of like, I can never make a mistake. I can never get something wrong.
What if you're a child with dyslexia or dysgraphia and you need that extra time? You know, it's not failing safe, it's adding stress.
Yeah. And I think that's a real blend of something we have to watch in education and learning, because, you know, sometimes we separate education and learning, but is, you know, what are we producing anxiety wise? How are we lessening it? And are there like quick wins? Like if I'm going to give you a case study on the test to psychologically safely allow you to fail, I need to give you a case study to analyze that's just different.
Right.
And let you analyze it and then let you get some type of feedback from it. So either you're getting like a quick grade, either we're going over it in class, we have an auto grader, we have something that it aligns, it gives you the opportunity to feel like either, wow, I need to go study, or I feel pretty good about it and I'm good, you know? And so I think that sometimes, and I see this in my middle child when she talks about anxiety, and my youngest, when you don't know what you don't know, that space is very anxiety inducing. But if I give them like a case study to analyze and then they knew that was going to be what was on the test, then whether they failed or didn't fail it, they're going to feel better because it's no longer that gray space. And we're not having to hold their hand. They're realizing it on their own. They're correcting the mistake on their own because they're independent human beings. And if they don't correct it, it's on them.
Right.
Like, I can't make you do it.
No. And I think we need that. We need accountability and we need more independence, because there's so many people who go to college. Even when I went to college longer than I want to think about, the girl lived in the door next to us. Her parents had held her hand her whole life and she kept bouncing checks. And I was like, how do you keep bouncing checks? Like, you should know how much money you have, because debit cards were a thing, but not as big. And she's like, well, I have all these checks, so I can keep writing, right? And I was like, no, just because they give you 50 checks doesn't mean that you have the money to write 50 checks. But somebody had held her hand her whole life. And I think she made it the full year, but barely. And she went back home because she just couldn't hack it on her own. And I think when we handhold and all of these things and don't provide the opportunity to fail safely, we're going to get more people who think just because they have 50 checks, they have the money for 50 checks.
Or like, I love the example. Like, my kids started doing their laundry. So when my kids started using technology, I was like, if you can use an iPad, you can do your laundry. And, you know, there were a few mishaps where we mixed our colors. And, like, to be fair, I don't sort my colors. I went to boarding school. Whatever you could fit in the washer was cheap. Yeah. So you would just fit it all in the washer and you would just roll with it. But, like, they made some mistakes and they failed a little bit. And some of their clothes got shrunk or got blood on, or they left a pen in their pocket and they figured it out. But when we're not allowing those types of spaces, then that's a problem. And when we think about, again, we talk a lot about we design not for today, but for where the learner is going to end their journey. If we're not thinking about that level of independence, what happens to the business person who doesn't know how to do the analysis they need to do, or that hasn't learned how to back check their work, or hasn't learned how to like maybe you're in a professional development and there's a new law or regulation and you have to now educate yourself on it. Well, they don't know how to educate themselves because they always relied on a teacher.
Right.
And so I think that, there's so much to this where education needs to mirror a little bit of some of these best practices that we know going into adulthood are needed, and allow those spaces for them to leave a pen in their pocket. And that pen is going to explode on your clothes a little bit. And that, to me, I think is really what that psychological safety is about. It's not like I put all of my parents' clothes in the washer and mess them up because then mom and dad are ticked.
Right.
But it's like, I put my clothes in the washer, I spilled my pen, I learned how to fix it. And most people that do that, they never really make the same mistake again.
Right.
And so if we could just build spaces for learning that does that for a student, where they can make a mistake, they can skin their knees, but they can pop back up, then we're lowering anxiety, we're creating independent people that can be independent in the workplace. We're creating people with higher order thinking skills, with critical thinking skills, and we're creating people that ideally at some point as an adult, they're like, oh, those moments where I practiced and then I, skinned my knee a little bit, that's what helped me ace the test. And then just mirror that in your life skills, because I think that education and life skills are so intertwined, but yet we try to separate them so much because we're teaching people for today and not for that long-term look.
Right. And I think, we're teaching people for the next test.
Yeah.
And even then, we're not doing all that great of a job at times because we're giving a study guide that's recall, but the test is going to have them analyzing or applying. And that's a huge juxtaposition right there.
And I think one of the things I wanted to talk about as we kind of wrap this up was designing learning programs that have a licensure component to them. And one of the things we've been deep diving a whole lot into here at Learner Journey Labs is the nursing world. And that's really because for the past 2 years, we have been just immersed in nursing and all things and NCLEX and the different levels. And so there's been a lot of us sitting together kind of and talking our way through if they have to pass the NCLEX and this is what the NCLEX looks like, how do we get them there?
Right.
And I feel like a lot of these design elements we've talked about, like the walk with me's and things, have been about designing a psychologically safe space that is ultimately aligned with that licensure test. And so, again, we're not thinking about, okay, I'm testing this student today in quarter 1 of their nursing program. We're thinking about the progression that they have to get through so that they can pass that licensure test. And I think we've kind of, as a company and as us 2 individuals, decided the answer is that starts day 1.
Right. Because if I want you to do it at the end, I need you to start doing it now. I can't just wait until halfway through and switch your thinking.
And I think that's the key word. We can't just switch your thinking. So we have to start, if you've got a program with a licensure requirement, you have to align that thinking from day 1. You can't say that, well, these students are just in their first quarter. No, you can take the material in that first quarter or in those first courses, and it's simple material, but you could still make them think in the same way. You can still make them have critical thinking skills with just the limited information that they have. That's still possible. Right. And I think that that's been a lot of kind of where we've been moving around in these spaces is how do we do that? How do we make it sure it's appropriate for that quarter 1 student? But again, if we're designing with that end goal in process, we have to have all of these psychologically safe places throughout the journey to where by the time they get to that last class or that last 2 or 3 classes, it's like muscle memory that they're already thinking that way. They've done it so many times. They've had so many opportunities to psychologically safely fail. And even in those last capstone and simulation classes, we're offering again, psychologically safe spaces to fail. I'm in simulation. My patient might die, but I'm going to learn from it, which ideally, they do, because we don't want that to happen in real life.
Right.
But what everyone has always done in those spaces is have those simulations and have those psychologically safe things. I just think they haven't realized that you can take that and pull it all the way back to the beginning and get there.
No, it's a good point, because you're not going to have somebody switch. You know, when we were talking about it just now, it triggered driver's ed. You know, they start with the rules and the things and then lead up to actually driving and passing, you know, the driver's license test. But they start with the rules and things like that. And so, yes, something very small and little, and they build upon that safely, you know, with classroom instruction and then practice. And it's not like they just have you driving right away.
Yeah.
Take it back. And in those tests and things like that, or, you know, when I took driver's ed, the instructor had another gas pedal and brake pedal to where, you know, if I wasn't going fast enough, then he could, or if I was going too fast, he could take over. And I think we need to take maybe some lessons from a driver's license or driving school and apply it in other things.
It's actually a really great analogy, Sarah.
Thanks.
It's a really great analogy. I think that is like the epitome of what psychological safety is it's like, I'm not going to let you wreck the car, but I'm going to let you independently do this. And then you're going to learn that when I hit the brake is when you should have hit the brake.
Right.
And I think that is the whole high stakes, low stakes, and really getting learners to understand, like, wow, I am braking late.
Right.
You know, I need to not brake so late. And I think that is the epitome of what we need to strive for as we're thinking about developing learning experiences that allow for safe failure in a way that a student is not disadvantaged to the point of failing a class in the first exam. Like, that was the big thing for me in college, I think. Like, we sat through college orientation and they were like, you have 3 exams, and that's different than high school, and that's all you get is 3 exams. And it's like, I'm sitting here doing the math and I'm like, if I failed first exam, like, I'm just, forget it. I'm done.
Right.
Like, there's nothing I can do at this point. If I
Might as well just give up.
Might as well just give up. Yeah, exactly. So I think, like, you know, having those moments where someone else can kind of take over and point out, like, hey, you were late braking. That is kind of something you need to not do, or you're going to rear end somebody.
Right.
All of those types of moments and things, I think, are critical elements for that. So thank you guys for hanging out with us today as we talked about psychological safety and failing. This is kind of a new thing. There is some really cool empirical research being done on this topic right now. One of my doctoral students is actually doing a study on this right now, and it's been interesting to see the intersection of this with anxiety and other elements within course design that we're going to explore over the next couple of weeks. But thanks for hanging out with us today.